somewhere in Botha Avenue, just around here. So our flight deck crew is bringing them in for the landing right now. So I'm sure we'll start shortly. Thank you. Good morning once again. My name is Johan Creer. I'd like to thank you all for taking the time out to attend this morning. Welcome in joining us on this very important discussion on what's been happening on the scene of retrenchments during the past year. Next to me is a Chief Executive Officer, Dirk Herman, and next to him is our General Secretary, Gideon du Plessis. And we thought to structure the conference in such a way that both of them will address you on two topics. Dirk will deal with the reasons and the extent of the retrenchments, and then thereafter Gideon will deal with the broader impact and the dynamics of a retrenchment process, and then we'll thereafter have a time for questions and of course for interviews and the like. So I think that the press conference couldn't have come at a more opportune time, in the sense that that we all know that there's a crisis playing off in the broader labour market, And I think what Dirk and Gideon will deal with today and share with you today will shed very important light on the whole issue. So you're very welcome. And without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Dirk Herman, who will deal with the reasons and the extent of the retrenchment.
Thank you. Thank you, Johan. Thank you very much for everyone. Thanks also for coming to this specific conference. The whole issue of retrenchments, of course, is quite complex. So it's not that simple to identify one reason or so. It's so complex, and that's why a conference like this is necessary. Now, we say that South Africa finds itself right in the middle of a perfect storm that is killing jobs. And this perfect storm puts the jobs of around 60,000 employees in various industries countrywide in the balance due to large-scale retrenchment processes. But what's important is that these numbers that we are talking about do not paint the picture of the whole of South Africa. These numbers is only retrenchments where Solidarity is involved or is aware of. It's simply not possible to have a total picture of South Africa. Nobody has it, but I think this is the most comprehensive that's available, but it's still not the whole picture. And I think what's also important, of course, is this is not the final picture. It's never the final picture, because there's consultation processes, and through consultation processes there can be, of course, less retrenchments, and of course there can come even more retrenchments that we are not aware of. Now, we are a trade union, and of course, as a trade union, we have advantage of seeing what lies ahead in the months to come, because trade unions, of course, receive 189 notices, and the rest of the role players in the economy does not have access to that specific 189 notices. So trade unions are in a position to say, what do we see? What do we see will come? The moment that we retrench, that is already 3 months later on, or 3 or 4 months later on, because of course companies must give us notices the moment that they contemplate to dismiss. So we have a bit of a picture on what will come, and that we can present us today. So we don't only have a reactive picture of what happened, but also a picture that will come. And the picture that we see at this stage is not a good one. We are seeing a perfect storm that we are in, and I think a perfect storm that still comes. Now, economic storms come in cycles, and the fact is that as a rule the market has the ability to restore itself in a period of time. And the fact is we are now in a downward cycle, but we know that the upturn will come. And the challenge we and all the other stakeholders have is to manage the downward cycle. And that's what we are busy to do as Solidarity, to manage the downward cycle, to make sure that we can manage it as positive as possible, and we will say a bit more about that. And that is why we call on companies to plan always with an upturn in mind. We know we are now in a downturn, we understand that, but plan with an upturn in mind, and not to make drastic short-term interventions that could have fatal long-term consequences for the company, its workers, and the economy. Now, in times of uncertainty, and that's the time where we are in right now, of course trade unions play an important role. The paradox is that Solidarity is experiencing at this stage a growth period, and for the simple reason that more and more employees join Solidarity to be protected in the workplace. The fact is that in periods like this is the period where a trade union that is really good and takes responsibility comes to its right. For workers, there's nothing as lonely as going through a retrenchment crisis all by yourself. So, Solidarity will do everything in its power to prevent the retrenchment of any of its members. So we go into every consultation with one thing in mind, and that is to prevent the retrenchment of that specific workers. And I think we have quite a good success record in doing that. But the fact is that workers are retrenched. And then we have a whole system and supporting structure in place to help workers to be replaced in other sectors of the economy or in other departments of that specific company. And that we are quite successful with. Quite a good example, a case in point, is Highveld Steel, where the whole plant was shut down. But we could succeed to place a huge number of our artisan members in other sectors in the economy. So the fact is, you can save jobs also via a placement strategy in the rest of the economy. But the fact of the matter is, there's always a period of time where people simply don't have work. And in that specific period of time, we have 8 programs in place to ensure that no member lives in poverty because of retrenchments. On the front page of this, you will see, for instance, a picture at Highveld Steel where we literally make sure that no member of ours go hungry because of retrenchment. So that's that 3 phases. In the first place, make absolutely sure that we prevent retrenchment as far as possible. Then place them, and in the third place, to help with social aid and support. So I think Solidarity in South Africa by far has the most comprehensive retrenchment plan to mitigate the effects of retrenchments. And you will also see that specifically in your membership numbers, that in a very hard period of time, we can have a growth of membership because we protect jobs. Then we also make sure that we improve our members' employability and competitiveness in the labor market. And that we do through training and development, and I will say something more about that. So it's important for me to carry over the message, although we are in a very difficult situation, one can do things to protect. There is hope even in a very difficult situation. You will see also in your pack, there is a nice graphic that illustrates the retrenchments, and I'm going to just summarize a bit of that. Employees in the mining industry are hit the hardest at this stage, with 36 companies that have been engaged in retrenchments during the past year, and with around about 30,000 employees facing retrenchments in this specific industry. The IT and communication technology industry is second worst off, with about 8,116 employees and 6 companies being affected by retrenchments. Now, I will say a bit more about that a bit later on, but it's important to understand the different forms of retrenchments and the different reasons. Now, in the IT industry, the main reason is, of course, the restructuring of the economy, the restructuring of that specific sector. That's the classic example where bigger units are breaking up into smaller units. Telkom was, of course, a company of the old economy style, and the new economy style is breaking up into smaller units. And that's quite a challenge. So that's a totally different kind of challenge to manage that retrenchment if you compare it with the mining and the steel industry, and I will say a bit more about that. In addition, 24 companies in the metal and engineering industry have announced retrenchment processes since April 2015. affecting around 7,918 employees, while 6 companies and around about 835 employees in the chemical industry have been affected by retrenchments. But here's what's important, especially in the metal engineering sector, but in other industries as well. Retrenchments are the end of the process. Gideon du Plessis will say a bit more about that. But in most of the time, the beginning of the process is short time. That has a tremendous influence on the cash flow of that specific employee. So that already on that stage, we are confronted with the reality that we must support those people with social support, and then there's not a retrenchment. When the retrenchment comes, then that person's cash flow and reserves are already exhausted because of short time and other measures. Now, it is difficult to determine the exact number of contract workers who have been or will be retrenched, as these workers are mostly non-unionized. And this also means that contract workers are retrenched easier than permanent staff, and many contract workers are not formally retrenched, but their contracts are simply not renewed, which has the same effect on the worker, rendering him or her unemployed. What's important is that investments flows to areas with the highest returns and the lowest risk. A measure of risk is always involved in investments. Thus, government has to limit uncertainty to try to limit that risk of capital. But the opposite is happening in South Africa, where greater uncertainty is created. The state is creating an over-regulated economy, which leads to uncertainty. The statutory environment changes often, and in most cases, resulting in more state intervention. Now, the state is getting stronger, but its ability to function is becoming weaker. So that all this different kind of factors make the storm that we are talking about very complex. But I will try to explain to you the storm by identifying 3 main themes, namely global uncertainty, local factors, and then of course the changing structure of the labor market, and I will say a bit more about that. Now let's start by global insecurity, and I will not say too much about that. Although there's major political instability in the world, including terrorism, regime changes, the refugee crisis, demographic aging, and many other factors that pressure social systems, especially in Europe, I want to focus only on 2 global factors because that affects South Africa to a large extent. The one is the surplus problem in China. The surplus problem in China is affecting several sectors, but affects the steel sector in particular. And the ripple effect is not only felt in South Africa, but also globally. For instance, in the UK, Tata Steel is threatening to withdraw. In Germany, 40,000 steel workers participated in protest marches. However, governments across the world cannot reach consensus on how to deal with the surplus problem. And this is, of course, one of the big challenges for us at this stage as well. How to deal with the surplus Chinese problem without interfering too much in the market. The next one is, of course, weak commodity prices. That's well known, so I will not say much more about that. The fact is, almost all commodity prices are under pressure. And then pressure on commodity prices puts pressure on sectors such as the steel and mining industry in South Africa. And it would seem as if there's a bit marginal recovery after the bloodbath of 2015. And I think it's on its way, marginal recovery is on its way, but it would bring very little relief. But however, I want to focus more on the local factors. Now, the local factors that affect the storm and influences the storm is in the first place the weaker growth. The IMF has adjusted South Africa's growth rate to only 0.6% of the GDP. That's the forecast that we look now at. And according to the Reserve Bank, there is a downturn in the South African business cycle. We all know that. The second one, we all know that, and that is the credit rating. The sword of a downwards credit rating is still hanging over South Africa's head. And then political uncertainty. And there we have the problem with irresponsible political statements about private property rights in particular, and that impair confidence. The next one in South Africa, local factor, is of course systemic corruption and crime. And the fact is, there's a strong perception that South Africa is systemically corrupt. And the Nkandla saga has become the symbol of such corruption. And the problem is that saga just reinforced that specific perception. And then South Africa's poor crime record also leads to uncertainty. Then we sit with a problem of a weakening state. And service delivery in general is deteriorating. Questions arose about the ability to create sufficient infrastructure so that the economy can run smoothly. Then we have the skills problem in South Africa. We still experience a skills problem. Training infrastructure is not in place to address the problem. And unilateral and unrealistic empowerment codes, while the mining sector is under tremendous pressure, a new mining charter with totally unrealistic targets has been announced unilaterally. And this type of central control over business creates uncertainty. That's the last thing that the industry can afford right now. The next point is then the changing structure of the labor market, the third theme. Now, I'm not going to say much about that, but I think in South Africa there's very little debate about this, is how the changing structure of, well, the global economy, but also, of course, South Africa, is affecting the job sector in its totality. For instance, larger companies are breaking up into smaller parts. Telkom is a very good case in point. Outsourcing and temporary jobs have become common practice in the labor market. We see what we call workerless production, and more is produced with less and less workers. So there can be, the economy can restore, but it's not necessarily so that new jobs will be created because of the issue of workerless production. But then there's a good piece of economic theory that says that there will be a smooth transition from the old economy to the new economy. So if you lose jobs here, then new economy will be created and will create jobs here. And therefore, at the end, the net sum will be positive in the forms of job creation and economic growth. But that's not that easy, because of all these factors that I've sketched to you here, the conditions for this transition from the old to the new economy are not in place. So it's not necessarily so that because of changes in this structure, part of the economy, new jobs will be created in this part of the economy and the net effect will be positive. We don't think the conditions are there for that, so that creates a dilemma. Now the question is now, what's the solution? And I understand that's not that simple to say what's the solution. Now I've said, okay, there's a lot of things that must be done and a lot of solutions what they're going to look like. I look at what I call a micro solution, and then I will give you a macro solution. Now the micro solution is very simple. It's the development of appropriate skills. we are not competitive enough because of our skills problem. And here our crisis is that the skills infrastructure is not in place. We sit in a situation of a dysfunctional school system, depending on whose figures, between 70% and 85% of schools are in practice dysfunctional. So we sit thus with no school infrastructure to address this skills problem. And then, of course, we sit also with literally a dysfunctional vocational training system in South Africa. If you look at state technical college, etc., etc., so we don't sit with state infrastructure that can, or educational infrastructure that can support the skills crisis. And then, of course, we sit with the big problem of a skills mismatch. And that happens then that someone with a degree simply does not get access to the economy because of skills mismatch. Now, from the Solidarity side, we say, all right, we focus on what we can, on those issues that we can control. The fact is, Solidarity, and we know we have a big influence, but we don't have influence on factors that affect the global economy, so we don't focus there. Nor do we have control over most of the local factors. So our main focus is on micro solutions because we have control over that. So what we focus strongly on is providing skills to our members so that they can be more employable. So we help our members thus to be empowered so that they can survive this period of downscaling. Just in last year, we paid out 30 million rand in the form of study aid from the trade union. And listen to this, 78% of the students who are studying through Solidarity believe they are in a better position than their parents. 78%, just because we focus on this micro solutions. Soltech, our own technical college, now it's considered one of the top 3 in South Africa. 1,000 artisans in their pipeline. If you ask them about the economic crisis, 100% of them are placed at this stage. Solidarity Helping Hand has a school system, a school support center to support schools to maintain high standards. Solidarity Center for Continued Training, make sure that there is continuous professional development and training for your members. So we thus support your members to survive, and that is why our members, through skills, can survive this kind of crises, and we can replace them. But the question is, what's the macro solution? And in preparation to this specific conference, I asked several people, what do they think the micro solution? It was very difficult to find. What's the single most important thing that can be done to address this problem? And my conclusion is that the answer does not lie in macroeconomic policy or regulatory environment. Of course that's important. Of course that's important, but that's not the answer. It lies in something softer than policy or regulation. It lies in investment and business confidence. The answer for South Africa lies in confidence. The fact is that capital flows towards confidence. Confidence creates an economy. Our problem in South Africa is at this stage that the president has become the symbol of lack of confidence. He has become the symbol of systemic problems. Now, it's nothing as so simple. So the answer does not lie in simply removing the president, but it would indeed be the starting point of the solution. Thank you very much. Gideon?
Thank you. Whilst he's sitting up, I'm just going to I'm going to stand. Just the first thing, the interesting thing that Dirk showed us last night, you know, we did a similar exercise December 2008, and Dirk showed me last night that in terms of that report, there were 22,200 employees affected by retrenchment in December 2008, just before the recession. Now it's 3 times more than in before the recession. So that in itself says that you cannot jump to the conclusion what it's about to happen, but you can just say the situation is worse than we experienced before recession. Now, first of all, there's a multiplying factor when it comes to retrenchments. We showed you the numbers here, just short of 60,000 that we're either involved in or aware of, but that's a small number. The first instance in the mining industry, Chamber of Mines indicated that for every permanent job that is created in the mining industry, 1.7 jobs are created on the outside. What are those 1.7 jobs? That's the catering people, it is the maintenance, it is the facility management, it is gardening, it is security, and all the other service providers. So in other words, that's where you create a lot of jobs. I was at Lily Mine, the first creditors meeting last week. 181 creditors rocked up at the first creditors meeting, and those are people involved in such a small little mining operation. So you can imagine if you talk about Anglos and the like. Then metal engineering, since it's very labor intensive in South Africa, there are 4 jobs created for every permanent job. Classic example where this theory was proven right is Highveld Steel. In total over the last 6 months they reduced by 2,440 employees, but 13,000 additional employees in the Emalafleni, Middelburg area lost their jobs because they were all, like at Lily Mine, the sole purpose of some of those businesses was to service Highveld Steel. So, but then it gets worse. Dirk added about contract not being renewed, but severance, voluntary separation packages is a bigger number than retrenchment. Then natural attrition. You'll find there's a recruitment freeze as a result of dismissed employees, employees who resign, that does not get replaced. There's early retirement packages, and at Lonman's case there's 51. Just to prove this theory as well in practice, Telform haven't retrenched a single employee since they commenced with their Section 189 process, but 4,500 of the employees already took voluntary separation packages, again proving the point that it is a small number, the official retrenchment. Lonman reduced their staff complement by 5,108, but only 78 employees were retrenched. The rest was as a result of natural attrition, as a result of voluntary separation packages. So the number is big, but then you must add job that not been created as a result of the situation. Let's again take Lonman. Lonman commissioned K4 shaft years ago. Ed will know about it. He was also involved, and I think Paul knows it as well. That was closed down prior to them even creating those 4,500 jobs. So you must factor that in. Then the last thing in the mining industry, terms according to the Chamber of Mines, for your category 4 to 9 employees, they have on average 10 dependents. So whatever figure you arrive at, you need to times it by 10 to look at the impact it's having on people. Then you've noticed mining jumps out just short of 30,000 employees affected. Then it drops down to 8,000 and then to 7,000 for the next 2 sectors. Why is mining so high? Because of, look at the scoreboard. They dropped from, we are not the top 10 investor destiny in Africa anymore. Gold industry used to be number 1 a few years ago. We are now number 7 in terms of production. Rand Daily Mail indicated in the first 22nd of January, they had an article how Mozambique and Nigeria attracts more FDI, foreign direct investment, than South Africa. Regulatory uncertainty. I was, for instance, in mining, I was in Parliament 2 weeks ago with the budget speech of the minister. And there are so many that pushed a lot of marginal companies over the edge. Then the second thing where Eskom comes in is the licenses of the tenders awarded to Tegeta Resources, Brakfontein Mine. Those are mines that's simply going to lead to job losses because they simply don't have the track record. They are like Aurora. So further retrenchments will follow. Then look at the mining charter. We're sitting with a job bloodbath. The next moment, the mining charter was just simply published in the government gazette, and then there are certain moot points within the charter that will definitely chase investors away or kill jobs. The first, just to mention a few, there's no exemption process for mines in terms of the additional financial contribution. Remember, they already pay tax, they already pay for royalties. Now there are new costs built into the charter. 1% of turnover, not profit, 1% of turnover goes into a community fund. Take some of the big mining companies. They've got turnover of a few billion rands. That's the turnover per annum. 1% of that, it's a huge number for a marginal company, a loss-making company, but they have to pay. That's just an additional tax. Then they have to pay 5% of their payroll in terms of resource development projects over and above the skills development levy. That will, together with Eskom, pushes a lot of mining companies over the edge. Then you can lose your license if you don't comply. So what will happen, despite the once empowered, always empowered issue, you've seen the new employment equity targets. It's very high, it's unrealistic. There are not so many skilled people out there. What will happen? Mining companies will start to poach from each other to retain their mining license. Their salary cost will just go up and up and up because the next person will make a higher offer, and then you will find that whole process. Then the whole carbon tax issue. The Davis committee basically said it must be placed on hold. We went to the mining Pakisa. They said, no, we will not place it on hold. We will introduce it at the right time, but at a level that is bearable until 2020. In the end, the last 3 months, 47,000 mining jobs were lost. Metal and engineering, you've seen our metal engineering figures in your pack. It says the last few months there was a loss of 8,000 jobs. But CIFSA, the biggest employer body, indicated that their members reduced in collectively their staff numbers by 11,000. Again, that proves that theory that more people loses their jobs than those who are getting retrenched. So you'll see in our figures last year 4,000 employees were officially retrenched in the metal engineering sector, but they shrunk by 11,000. Then why is there such a bloodbath in the mining industry, just to pick on this specific industry? First of all, Minister Zwane, Minister of DMR, made an announcement this year at the mining in Daba that 32,000 employees in the mining sector will lose their jobs. What was the end result? 22 Section 189 letters followed a month after that announcement because he gave political green light for retrenchments. In the past, the previous minister, Ramatlori, Shabangu, they were people we were following because they had such an enormous aggressive approach towards any form of retrenchment that they actually made our lives a lot easier as trade union officials because they literally prevented any form of retrenchment. Here the minister comes and he pull out the plug, and the next moment you'll find retrenchment. But he won't be able, most probably, to say it again at the next year's Indaba, because if government policy, as Mr. Mbalula announced yesterday, that certain sports teams will not be allowed to host a World Cup, I think with the mining stats they will not allow to host the next mining in Dalba. So it's very likely that will not happen. Then impact of previous strikes. Let's look at Lonmin. They had cash reserves of $200,000. That was 2.4 billion rands the month when the AMCU strike commenced in January 2014. Wiped out all their cash reserves. Lily Mine. AMCU went on strike. at Lily Mine 3 years ago. They wiped off 30 million off their bottom line, and that is why they don't have any cash reserves to absorb the difficulty they are in. Obviously, there's a lot of mines being mined out. Retrenchments will just happen. Rustenburg, the predictions are that in 25 years' time there will not be a single mining operation left at Rustenburg. Then care and maintenance. Again, Hossie and Safi Shaft, Lonman placed under care and maintenance because it's cheaper to put it under care and maintenance than to run it. Retrench a lot of employees. The end result, when you start it up again, the condition deteriorated in the mine, and secondly, you need less people. The impact of Section 54 notices, a huge impact on retrenchment because it impacts on profitability through a loss of production. There, for instance, AngloGold Ashanti has got an ex-employee, a disgruntled employee, left AngloGold Ashanti, joined the DMR as an inspector, left, right and center. He issues the Section 54 notices because he's a disgruntled employee. The other day in the Northwest, there was an employee sitting on a bench having his lunch. He dropped off, he fell off, they closed the mine as a result of that incident. So that is the major impact it is having on the mining industry. Then the selling of takeover of mines. Look at what's happening at the 3 Anglo mines taken over by Sibanya. Sibanya basically got the nod from the Competition Commission and Tribunal by standing firm and saying, we will retrench. You cannot take over a loss-making business with the same overhead costs. Look at Optimum, taken over by Tegeta Resources. Again, as much as Solidarity and the NUM objected to their clause that they're going to retrench after the takeover, they were given the green light. So that leads to retrenchments. Then a lot of employees, there was so much debt. Anglo American did a survey that the debt situation of the employees and all the garnishing orders, 84% of the employees within their bargaining unit, category 4 to 9, and your miners, artisans and officials, 84% of the employees had debt problems. So then they take a severance package just to recover for a short term, and then a lot of people are just sick and tired of the uncertainty. They take packages. They end up, most of those employees, in poverty because they just use it without any discretion. Then our favorite company to butt heads with, but they also a company that's well run, but we also question their unfair labor practices. Sibanya, they just dismiss left, right and center employees because it's cheaper to dismiss, go and fight at CCMA, go and fight the labor court than pay a package. So employees in these cases also bear the brunt of it. Then will things get better? Obviously it can, but there are just some of the negative things. We've lost so many skills and experienced employees that when you have that upturn phase, you have to go and recruit employees again. The mechanization and automation processes replaces employees forever. So if there's an upturn phase, it doesn't mean more employees will be required. Then funding is obviously a problem for most companies. Their cash reserves depleted. They cannot fund new developments in the upturn phase. Then I know it's actually a stock quote, but there's the dead cat bounce that a lot of employers are afraid of because 2009, 2010, the beginning of 2010, and later on there was a bit of an upturn in the next moment. What happened in the last year or so? So a lot of investors, a lot of companies will obviously not just invest outright. Then industrial relations. The one solution is long-term deals in wage negotiations. The most unstable phase in terms of industrial relations stress, pressure and tension at any workplace is around a wage negotiation. The Chamber of Mines got it right in the gold sector for us to sign a 3-year period. So for 3 years there's supposed to be peace and stability. And so that is the one area to neutralize it and to nullify it. And then the other downside, a major impact on the mining industry. We sit on the illegal miner task team. The indications are that there are close to 40,000 illegal miners working in this country. How many did we retrench over the last 3 years? Just over 40,000. So where do mine workers go to? They go underground, they run those zama shifts, because in the end that's the only business they know. We had it at one of the companies where we had a whistleblower of one of the employees told us that their company buy gold from the illegal miners operating in their own mine. But it's a massive industry, and it's destroying jobs going into the future because it destroys the infrastructure and it floods the market. Then my last slide, solutions. To add on to what Dirk said, that we need a more stable economic environment. The one thing is, you'll find it in your packs, we have our own social and labor plan dealing with retrenchments, where it's got 4 legs. The first one is to prevent even a retrenchment happening. It's proactive measures, it's future forums, where up front the employees are aware of what's happening in the company. Jointly they look at austerity measures. Then you sit with fair procedures. A lot of the retrenchment processes we enter in, the first phase is to haggle around legalities, and we say, but if fair procedure has been followed and we've put out the fair procedure there, then we will only focus on the rationale and not on procedure. Then we've put in to say, but if there's going to be retrenchment, in our document there are 24 alternatives to look at before we're entering into retrenchment. I must give a compliment to Exaro. Exaro last week announced that they need to reduce perhaps by 565 employees, but they maybe they used our model as an example, but they listed each and every measure they took to reduce cost before they got to the employees. For instance, they were selling off the helicopter, the Boeing, etc., etc. But those are the things that you'll find in our document, so that retrenchment is indeed an act of last resort. And then we have measures to mitigate if somebody indeed gets retrenched. How do you put in a safety net? And then finally, how, and Dirk dealt with it, how the Solidarity movement assist employees getting retrenched, because that's when your member needs you the most. And we've got those steps: emotional and trauma counseling, financial assistance, food parcels, assistance with drafting of a CV, promoting CVs, and also giving portable skills training. Then in the mining, the solutions are there. They're just simply not being applied. We signed August last year the 10-point plan, job savings. It's only the CCMA that bothers dealing with it whenever they're involved. The companies don't even look at it. The government haven't even referred to it again, so that is something there that just needs to be used. The mining Pakisa, on the 22nd of January, the mining Pakisa outcomes were published and sent to us as stakeholders. Since then, it's been put on ice. So the government solution on everything on how to deal with retrenchments is sitting in a document, but it's not being implemented. Then, all over the world, there are retrenchments taking place. It's not only South Africa, but we've just got so many more hurdles in what we put in the road. And in the end, that's why our situation is much worse than comparing to a lot of the other countries. Then we need a goal. For instance, all the stakeholders involved in whatever industry, and if it's employment growth, if it's a stable economy, if whatever that creates jobs, that's something that's missing. And the reason why we don't have a single goal, for instance, employment growth, for 2 reasons. One, there's a lack of leadership on all sides. You have union officials more concerned about their own profile, their own careers. You have CEOs who will, during open debate sessions, will around the tea and coffee station have so much to say, but when they get onto the stage, they say the opposite. So they don't speak out, and then politically, I don't have to tell you the poor leadership we have. And then the biggest challenge is the ideological mindset that we're dealing with, that say, but in order to implement a specific ideology, there are going to be a few casualties. The casualties will be workers, but just as long as we arrive at those ideological goals that we set to ourselves, workers will pay the price, but it's part of the struggle. But in the end, it basically put more people out in the street, and more people are obviously unemployed. So this is just in a nutshell then a further summary to add on to what Dirk said. But the two things that you must remember is, first of all, the situation is worse than December 2008 prior to recession. Secondly, the figures that we officially gave you, you can easily time it by 5 to get to the actual figure of jobs that the economy has lost over the last 12 months. Thank you. Thanks, Johan.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Gideon. Dirk, thank you very much. I think there's a lot of information that came out that needs to be digested, but there's an opportunity for questions to either Dirk or Gideon, or some comments. Please. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, Ed started with Reuters. Just tell me, the 22 layoff notices in the mining industry since the Indaba, is that part of the 88 number that you mentioned? Is that 22 included in the 88?
You will find, look at the dates. All the dates after January. The Indaba was in January.
It's February.
February, but look at all those dates. February, March, April. Then you will find there was in November, December, hardly anything. January, maybe, and then the next moment you will see the floodgate opened up regarding Section 189 notices since that time.
Okay, but my question is just you've got this 88 number, and that's since April of last year, and those 22 in the mining sector are part of that 88.
Yes,
that's all I'm asking.
that's it. Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, sir.
Gideon, Paul Bricker from Bloomberg News. Gideon, you said before the VSPs. Now, if that, I suppose, is to people take that as a way to satisfy their debt or to cover their debt, that is a problem. But otherwise, with loanmen, for example, there were a number of VSPs that were taken. So, can that also be, an ideal, or an acceptable, I suppose, solution for some workers?
To avoid forced retrenchments, Paul, is obviously always first price. But we've just seen the backlash of voluntary separation packages because it's taken for various reasons. Two I've mentioned. The one is simply due to debt problems. The second one is they say they want to take control of their own future. To work under uncertain circumstances, they have no control. If they take a package, they have control. Then the other reason is your good employees. And we've seen it at Telkom as well. Your good, highly qualified, highly skilled, core skills people, they jump for packages first. So the first batch that you lose are your highly skilled people that can either go overseas or they can go and market themselves. But then the majority of those employees, two things happen to them. They either take a job of a lesser salary, so they are worse off than before, or they find themselves unemployed and they use up all their funds and they end up on the impoverished statistics. And we have started with a campaign to basically recommend to our employees not to take a VSP unless the company's in business rescue. Like a Highveld, like a Lily Mine, we say then take it because you don't know if you're going to get a package. But other than that, you look at the numbers. Nobody's employing for two reasons. The one is obviously financial pressure, and the other one obviously in mining with the targets that we're dealing with, employment equity targets. Our members' chances of finding a job are very slim. So as a result, we really spend so much time trying to talk people out of a VSP.
We call this sometimes also suicide packages because of the solidarity structure. We have a much more comprehensive approach, meaning that in a lot of cases, we catch up our members later on again in your own social net. Because the Solidarity Helping Hand's responsibility is to help and support people that gets in trouble later on. So in a lot of cases, we just got those employees again up in our own social net. That's why we call that suicide packages, and we literally say to people, no, don't do that.
Any more questions, comments? Yes, ma'am.
Jeff, you said that during this period your memberships increased. Can you give us some detail about that, please?
Yes. We our membership at this stage is it's interesting. The increase is a net increase. So one loses members, of course, via fall-offs, and but our net picture every month is higher. So at this stage, we grow at a net of about 1,000 members. I think that's the only trade union in South Africa that still has a very active growth strategy. Well, AMCU as well.
Different tactics. but
Different tactics. So we grow at about 1,000 members. I think most probably in in the month of May, we will be the first time in our history over 150,000 members. So we have there's a nice growth tendency in Solidarity, but of course we have also the problem of losing members. But the reason why we have a net growth is for the simple reason that we have a net that catch our members up, place them again, and bring them back into the formal economy and back into Solidarity. What we've also done is we've changed our structure to a way that we can also accommodate what we call the new economy, and that means that now a company is breaking up in smaller units with large parts that's contracted out, and we've changed our structure that we can have individual services. We have a call center that is by far the biggest call center in South Africa in the trade union environment that can render services from the call center. We have a web page that renders services electronically, etc. So what we've done is to change our service structure in such a way that you can service also in the new micro and medium industries. That's traditionally trade unions were not organized in those structures, and we've changed our structure that we can do that, and that also helps. If we lose someone in the old industrial economy, we pick Mimo up again in the new smaller economy, and I think that's all that helps us to have still a growth figure.
Anyone else? There will be a chance afterwards to also engage further on the in-depth of the report and what's in your packs. So if there's no one else, I'd like to say this is the end of our formal discussion. Thank you very much for coming and attending and listening so attentively. There's something to eat and to drink outside, so you're welcome to join us, and please to have interviews or further questions with anyone that you feel the need to do that with. So thank you very much.